Guilty or Not Guilty by Thomas Waters.
A few weeks after the lucky termination of the Sanford affair, I was engaged in the investigation of a remarkable case of burglary accompanied by homicide, which had just occurred at the residence of a Mr. Bagshaw, gentleman of competent fortune, situated within a few miles of Kendal in Westmoreland. The particulars forwarded to the London police authorities by the local magistrate were chiefly these. Mr. Bagshaw, who had been some time absent at Leamington, Warwickshire, with his entire establishment, wrote to Sarah King, a young woman left in charge of the house and property, to announce his own speedy return, and at the same time directing her to have a particular bedroom aired and other household matters arranged for the reception of his nephew, Mr. Robert Bristow, who, having just arrived from abroad, would, he expected, leave London immediately for Five Oaks House. The positive arrival of this nephew had been declared to several tradesmen of Kendal by King earlier in the day preceding the night of the murder and robbery, and by her directions butcher meat, poultry, fish, and so on had been sent by them to Five Oaks for his table. The lad who carried the fish home stated that he had seen a strange young gentleman in one of the sitting rooms on the ground floor through the half-open door of the apartment. On the following morning it was discovered that Five Oaks House had been not indeed broken into, but broken out of. This was evident from the state of the door fastenings and the servant woman barbarously murdered. The neighbours found her lying quite dead and cold at the foot of the principal staircase, clothed only in a nightgown and stockings, and with a flat chamber candlestick grasped tightly in her right hand. It was conjectured that she had been roused from sleep by some noise below, and having descended to ascertain the cause, had been mercilessly slain by the disturbed burglars. Mr. Bagshaw arrived on the following day, and it was then found that not only a large amount of plate, but between £3,000 and £4,000 in gold and notes, the produce of government stock sold about 2 months previously, had been carried off. The only person except his niece who lived with him that knew there was a sum in the house was his nephew Robert Bristow, to whom he had written, directing his letter to the Hummums Hotel, London, stating that the sum for the long contemplated purpose of Rylands had spent some time lying idle at Five Oaks, and as he wished to consult him upon his bargain before finally concluding it. This Mr. Robert Bristow was now nowhere to be seen or heard of, and what seemed to confirm beyond a doubt the, to Mr. Bagshaw and his niece, torturing, horrifying suspicion that this nephew was the burglar and assassin. A portion of the identical letter written to him by his uncle was found in one of the offices. As he was nowhere to be met with or heard of in the neighbourhood of Kendal, it was surmised that he must have returned to London with his booty, and a full description of his person and the dress he wore, as given by the fishmonger's boy, was sent to London by the authorities. They also forwarded for our use and assistant one Josiah Barnes, a sly, sharp, vagabond sort of fellow, who had been apprehended on suspicion, chiefly, or rather wholly, because of his former intimacy with the unfortunate Sarah King, who had discarded him, it seems, on account of his incorrigibly idle and, in other respects, disreputable habits. The alibi he set up was, however, so clear and decisive that he was but a few hours in custody, and he now exhibited great zeal for the discovery of the murderer of the woman to whom he had, to the extent of his perverted instincts, been sincerely attached. He filled at festivals of the humbler Kendalese, sang, tumbled, ventriloquized at their tavern orgies, and had he not been so very highly gifted, might, there was no little doubt, have earned a decent living as a carpenter, to which profession his father, by dint of much exertion, had about half bred him. The principal use to us was that he was acquainted with the features of Mr. Robert Bristow, and accordingly, as soon as I had received my commission and instructions, I started off with him to Hummum's Hotel, Covent Garden. In answer to my inquiries, it was stated that Mr. Robert Bristow had left the hotel a week previously without settling his bill, which was, however, a very small amount, as he usually paid every evening, and had not since been heard of. Neither had he taken his luggage with him. This was odd, though the period stated would have given him ample time to reach Westmoreland on the day it was stated he had arrived there. What dress did he wear when he left?
That which he usually wore, a foraging cap with a gold band, a blue military surtout coat, light trousers, and Wellington boots.
The precise dress described by the fishmonger's errand boy. We next proceeded to the Bank of England to ascertain if any of the stolen notes had been presented for payment. I handed in a list of the numbers furnished by Mr. Bagshaw, and was politely informed that they had all been cashed earlier the day before by a gentleman in a sort of undress uniform and wearing a foraging cap. Lieutenant James was the name endorsed upon them, and the address Harley Street, Cavendish Square, which, of course, was a fictitious one. The cashier doubted that he should be able to swear to the person of the gentleman who changed the notes, but he had apparently noticed his dress. I returned to Scotland Yard to report no progress, and it was then determined to issue bills descriptive of Bristow's person and offering a considerable reward for his apprehension, or for such information as might lead to it. But the order had scarcely been issued, when who should we see walking deliberately down the yard towards the police office but Mr. Robert Bristow himself, dressed precisely as before described. I had just time to caution the inspector not to betray any suspicion, but to hear his story and let him quietly depart, and to slip with Josiah Barnes out of sight, when he entered and made a formal but most confused complaint of having been robbed something more than a week previously, where or by whom he knew not, and afterwards deceived, bamboozled, and led astray in his pursuit of the robbers, by a person whom he now suspected could be a confederate with them. Even of this latter personage he could afford no tangible information, and the inspector, having quietly listened to his statement, intended doubtless as a mystification, told him the police should make inquiries and wished him good morning. As soon as he had turned out of Scotland Yard by the street leading to the Strand, I was upon his track. He walked slowly on, but without pausing, till he reached the Saracen's Head, Snow Hill, where to my great astonishment he booked himself for Westmoreland by the night coach, and then walked into the inn, and seating himself in the coffee-room, called for a pint of sherry and some biscuits. He was now safe for a short period at any rate, and I was about to take a turn in the street, just to meditate upon the most advisable course of action, when I espied 3 bucklishly attired, bold-faced-looking fellows, one of whom I thought I recognized, spite of his fine dress, entering the booking office. Naturally anxious in my vocation, I approached as closely to the door as I could without being observed, and I heard one of them, my acquaintance sure enough, I could not be deceived in that voice, ask the clerk if there were any vacant places in the night coach to Westmoreland. To Westmoreland? Why, what in the name of Mercury could a detachment of the swell mob be wanting in that country of furs and frieze coats? The next sentence uttered by my friend, as he placed money for booking 3 insides to Kendall on the counter, was equally, or perhaps more puzzling. Is the gentleman who entered the office just now, in with the foraging cap, I mean, to be our fellow passenger?
Yes, he has booked himself, and has, I think, since gone into the house.
Thank you, and good morning. I had barely time to slip aside into one of the passages when the 3 gentlemen came out of the office past me and swaggered out of the yard.
Vague, undefined suspicions at once beset me relative to the connection of these worthies with the foraging cap and the doings at Kendal. There was evidently something in all this more than natural, if police philosophy could but find it out. I resolved at all events to try, and in order to have a chance of doing so, I determined to be of the party, nothing doubting that I should be able, in some way or other, to make one in whatever game they were intending playing. I, in my turn, entered the booking office, and finding there were still 2 vacant places, secured them for both James Jenkins and Joshua Barnes, countrymen and friends of mine, returning to the North Country. I returned to the coffee room where Mr. Bristow was still seated, apparently in deep and anxious meditation, and wrote a note, with which I dispatched the inn porter. I had now ample leisure for observing the suspected burglar and assassin. He was a pale, intellectual-looking and withal handsome young man of about 26 years of age, of slight but well-knit frame, and with the decided air, travel-stained and jaded as he appeared, of a gentleman. His look was troubled and careworn, but I sought in vain for any indication of the starting, nervous tremor always, in my experience, exhibited by even old practitioners in crime when suddenly accosted. Several persons had entered the room hastily without causing him even to look up. I determined to try an experiment on his nerves, which I was quite satisfied no man who had recently committed a murder and but the day before changed part of the produce of that crime into gold with the Bank of England could endure without wincing. My object was not to procure evidence producible in a court of law by such means, but to satisfy my own mind. I felt a growing conviction that, spite of appearances, the young man was guiltless of the deed imputed to him, and might be the victim. I could not help thinking either of some strange combination of circumstances, or, more likely, of a diabolical plot for his destruction, essentially possibly to the safety of the real perpetrators of the crime, very probably, so ran my suspicions, friends and acquaintances of the 3 gentlemen who were about to be our fellow travellers. My duty, I knew, was quite as much the vindication of innocence as the detection of guilt, and if I could satisfy myself that he was not the guilty party, no effort of mine should be wanting, I determined, to extricate him from the perilous position in which he stood. I went out of the room and remained absent for some time, then suddenly entered with a sort of a bounce, walked swiftly and with a determined air straight up to the box where he was seated, grasped him tightly by the arm, and exclaimed roughly, "So I've found you at last." There was no start, no indication of fear whatever, not the slightest. The expression of his countenance as he peevishly replied, "What the devil do you mean?" was simply one of surprise and annoyance. "Oh, I beg your pardon," I replied. "The waiter told me a friend of mine, one Bagshaw, who has given me the slip, was here, and I mistook you for him." He courteously accepted my apology, quietly remarking at the same time that though his own name was Bristow, he had, oddly enough, an uncle in the country of the same name as the person I had mistaken him for. Surely, thought I, this man is guiltless of the crime imputed to him, and yet at this moment the porter entered to announce the arrival of the gentleman I had sent for. I went out, after giving the newcomer instructions not to lose sight of Mr. Bristow, hastened home to make arrangements for the journey. Transformed by the aid of a flaxen wig, broad-brimmed hat, green spectacles, and a multiplicity of waistcoats and shawls, into a heavy, elderly, well-to-do personage, I took my way with Joshua Barnes, who I had previously thoroughly drilled as to speech and behaviour towards our companions, to the Saracen's Head, a few minutes previous to the time for starting. We found Mr. Bristow already seated, but his 3 friends, I observed, were curiously looking on, desirous, no doubt, of ascertaining who were to be their fellow travellers, before venturing to coop themselves up in a space so narrow, and under certain circumstances so difficult of egress. My appearance and that of Barnes, who, sooth to say, looked much more of a simpleton than he really was, quite assured them, and in they jumped with confident alacrity. A few minutes afterwards, the all right of the attending ostlers gave the signal for departure, and away we started. A more silent, less social party I never assisted at. Whatever amount of feast of reason each of either of us might have silently enjoyed, not a drop of flow of soul welled up from one of the six insides. Every passenger seemed to have his own particular reasons for declining to display himself in either mental or physical prominence. Only one or two incidents, apparently unimportant, for which I carefully noted down in the tablet of my memory, occurred during the long, wearisome journey, till we stopped to dine at about 30 miles from Kendal, when I ascertained, from an overheard conversation of one of the three with the coachman, that they intended to get down at a roadside tavern more than 6 miles this side of the place. "Do you know which house they intend to stop at?" I inquired of my assistant, as soon as I got him out of sight and hearing at the back of the premises. "Quite well. It is within about 2 miles of Five Oaks House." "Indeed. Then you must stop there too. It is necessary I should go to Kendal with Mr. Bristow, but you can remain and watch their proceedings." "With all my heart." "But what excuse can you make for remaining there when they know you are booked for Kendal? Fellows of that stamp are keenly suspicious, and in order to be useful, you must be entirely unsuspected." "Oh, leave that to me. I'll throw dust enough in their eyes to blind 100 such as they, I warrant ye." "We shall see. Well, now to dinner." Soon after the coach had once more started, Mr. Josiah Barnes began drinking from a stone bottle, which he drew from his pocket, and so potent must have been the spirit it contained that he became rapidly intoxicated. Not only speech, but eyes, body, arms, legs, the entire animal, by the time we reached the inn, where we had agreed he should stop, was thoroughly, hopelessly drunk, and so savagely quarrelsome, too, did he become, that I expected every instant to hear my real vocation pointed out for the edification of the company. Strange to say, utterly stupid and savage as he seemed, all dangerous topics were carefully avoided. When the coach stopped, he got out, how I know not, and reeled and tumbled into the tap room, from which he declared he would not budge an inch till the next day. Vainly did the coachman remonstrate him upon his foolish obstinacy. He may as well have argued with a bear. He at length determined to leave him in his drunken humour. I was out of patience with the fellow, and snatching an opportunity when the room was clear, began to upbraid him for his vexatious folly. He looked sharply around, and then his body as evenly balanced, his eye as clear, his speech as free as my own, crowed out in a low, exulting voice, "Didn't I tell you I'd manage it nicely?" The door opened, and in a twinkling, extremity of drunkenness, both brain and limb, was again assumed with a perfection of acting I have never seen equalled. He had studied from nature, that was perfectly clear. I was quite satisfied, and with renewed confidence obeyed the coachman's call to take my seat. Mr. Bristow and I were now the only inside passengers, and as far as the disguise was useless, I began stripping myself of my superabundant clothing, wigs, spectacles, etc., and in a few minutes, with the help of a bundle I had with me, presented to the astonished gaze of my fellow traveller the identical person who had so rudely accosted him in the coffee-room of the Sarasate Head Inn. "Why, what in the name of all that's comical is the meaning of this?" demanded Mr. Bristow, laughing immoderately at my changed appearance. I briefly and coolly informed him that he was for some minutes overwhelmed, and with consternation and astonishment. He had not, he said, even heard of the catastrophe at his uncle's. Still amazed and bewildered as he was, no sign which I could interpret into the indication of guilt escaped him. "I do not wish to intrude upon your confidence, Mr. Bristow," I remarked after a long pause, But you must perceive that unless the circumstances I related to you are in some way explained, you stand in a perilous predicament. You are correct, he replied after some hesitation. It is a tangled web. Still I doubt that some mode of vindicating my perfect innocent self would present itself. He then relapsed into silence, and neither of us spoke again till the coach stopped, in accordance with a previous intimation I had given the coachman opposite the gate of the Kendal prison. Mr. Bristow started and changed colour, but instantly mastering his emotion, he calmly said, "You, of course, but perform your duty. Mine is not to distrust a just and all-seeing providence." We entered the jail, and necessary searches of his clothes and luggage was effected as forbearingly as possible. To my great dismay, we found amongst the money in his purse a Spanish gold piece of a peculiar coinage, and in the lining of his portmanteau, very dexterously hidden, a cross set with brilliants, both of which I knew, by the list forwarded to the London police, formed part of the plunder carried off from Five Oaks House. The prisoner's vehement protestations that he could not conceive how such articles came into his possession excited a derisive smile on the face of the veteran turnkey, whilst I was thoroughly dumbfounded by the seemingly complete demolition of the theory of innocence I had woven out of his candid, open manner and unshakable hardihood of nerve. "I dare say the articles came into you in your sleep," sneered the turnkey as we turned to leave the cell. "Oh," I mechanically exclaimed, "in his sleep? I had not thought of that." The man stared, but I had passed out of the prison before he could express his surprise or contempt in words. The next morning the justice room was densely crowded to hear the examination of the prisoner. There was also a very numerous attendance of magistrates. The case, from the position in the life of the prisoner, and the strange and mysterious circumstances of the affair altogether, having excited an extraordinary and extremely painful interest among all classes in the town and neighbourhood. The demeanour of the accused gentleman was anxious, certainly, but withal calm and collected, and there was, I thought, a light of fortitude and conscious probity in his clear, bold eyes, which guilt never successfully stimulated. After the hearing of some minor evidence, the fishmonger's boy was called, and asked if he would point out the person he had seen at Five Oaks on the day preceding the burglary. The lad looked fixedly at the prisoner for something more than a minute without speaking, and then said, "The gentleman standing before the fire when I saw him with his cap on. I should like to see this person with his cap on before I say anything." Mr. Bristow dashed on his foraging cap, and the boy immediately exclaimed, "That is the man." Mr. Cowan, a solicitor retained by Mr. Bagshaw for his nephew, objected that this was, after all, only swearing to a cap, or at best to the ensemble of her dress, and ought not to be received. The chairman, however, decided that it must be taken quantum velat, and in corroboration with other evidence. It was next disposed by several persons that the deceased Sarah King had told them that her master's nephew had positively arrived at Five Oaks. An objection to the reception of this evidence as partaking in the nature of hearsay was also made, and similarly overruled. Mr. Bristow begged to observe that Sarah King was not one of his uncle's old servants and was entirely unknown to him. It was quite possible, therefore, that he was personally unknown to her. The bench observed that all these observations might be fitly judged before a jury, but in the present stage of the proceedings were uselessly addressed to them, whose sole duty it was to ascertain if a sufficiently strong case of suspicion had been made out against the prisoner to justify his committal for trial. A constable next proved finding a portion of a letter, which he produced in one of the offices of Five Oaks, and then Mr. Bagshaw was directed to be called in. The prisoner, upon hearing this order given, exhibited great emotion, and earnestly entreated that his uncle and himself might be spared the necessity of meeting each other for the first time after a separation of several years under such circumstances. "We can receive no evidence against you, Mr. Bristow, in your absence," replied the chairman in a compassionate tone of voice. "But your uncle's disposition will occupy but a few minutes. It is, however, indispensable." "At least then, Mr. Cowan," said the agitated young man, "prevent my sister from accompanying her uncle. I could not bear that." He was assured she would not be present, and in fact she had become seriously ill through anxiety and terror, and the crowded assemblage waited in painful silence for the approach of the reluctant prosecutor. He presently appeared, a veritably white-haired man, 70 years old at least. He seemed from his form bowed with age and grief, his eyes fixed upon the ground, and his whole manner indicative of sorrow and dejection. "Uncle!" cried the prisoner, springing towards him. The aged man looked up and seemed to read in the clear countenance of his nephew a full refutation of the suspicions entertained against him, tottered forward with outstretched arms, and in the words of the sacred text, fell upon his neck and wept, exclaiming in choking accents, forgive me, Robert, that I ever for a moment doubted you. Mary never did. Never, Robert, never, not for an instant." A profound silence prevailed during this outburst of feeling, and a considerable pause ensued before the usher of the court, at a gesture from the chairman, touched Mr. Bagshaw's arm and begged his attention to the bench. Certainly, said he, hastily wiping his eyes and turning towards the court. My sister's child, gentlemen," he added appealingly, "who has lived with me from childhood. You will excuse me, I'm sure." "There needs no excuse, Mr. Bagshaw," said the chairman kindly, "but it is necessary this unhappy business should be proceeded with. Hand the witness the portion of the letter found at Five Oaks. Now, is that your handwriting, and is it a portion of the letter you sent to your nephew, informing him of the large sum of money for a particular purpose at Five Oaks?" "It is." "Now," said the clerk to the magistrates, addressing me, "please produce the articles in your possession." I laid the Spanish coin and the cross upon the table. "Please to look at those two articles, Mr. Bagshaw," said the chairman. "Now, sir, on your oath, are they a portion of the property of which you have been robbed?" The aged gentleman stooped forward and examined them earnestly, then turned and looked with quivering eyes, if I may be allowed the expression, in his nephew's face, but returned no answer to the question. "It is necessary you should reply yes or no, Mr. Bagshaw," said the clerk. "Answer, uncle," said the prisoner soothingly. "Fear not for me. God and my innocence to aid, I shall yet break through the web of villainy in which I at present seem hopelessly involved." Bless you, Robert, bless you. I am sure you will." "Yes, gentlemen, the cross and the coin on the table are part of the property carried off." A smothered groan indicative of the sorrowing sympathy felt for the venerable gentleman arose from the crowded court on hearing this declaration. I then disposed of finding them as previously stated, and as soon as I concluded, the magistrates consulted together for a few minutes, and then the chairman, addressing the prisoner, said, "I have to inform you that the bench had all agreed that sufficient evidence has been adduced against you to warrant them in fully committing you for trial. We are, of course, bound to hear anything you have to say, but such being our intention, your professional adviser will perhaps recommend you to reserve whatever defense you have to make for another tribunal. Here it could not avail you." Mr. Cowan expressed his concurrence in the intimation of the magistrates, but the prisoner vehemently protested against sanctioning by his silence the accusation preferred against him. "I have nothing to reserve. he exclaimed with passionate energy. "Nothing to conceal. I will not owe my acquittal of this foul charge to any trick of lawyer craft. If I may not come out of this investigation with an untainted name, I desire not to escape at all. The defense, or rather the suggestive facts I have to offer for the consideration of the bench, are these. On the evening of the day I received my uncle's letter, I went to Drury Lane Theatre, remaining out late. On my return to the hotel, I found I had been robbed of my pocketbook, which contained not only that letter and a considerable sum in banknotes, but papers of great professional importance to me. It was too late to adopt any measures for its recovery that night, and the next morning, as I was dressing myself to go out, in order to apprise the police authorities of my loss, I was informed that a gentleman desired to see me instantly on important business. He was shown up and announced himself to be a detective police officer. The robbery I had sustained had been revealed by an accomplice, and it was necessary I should immediately accompany him. We left the hotel together, and after consuming the entire day in perambulating all sorts of by-streets and calling at several suspicious-looking places, my officious friend all at once discovered the thieves had left town for the west of England, hoping doubtless to reach a large town and get gold for the notes before the news of their having been stopped should have been reached. He insisted upon immediate pursuit. I wished to return to the hotel for a change of clothes, as I was but lightly clad, and night travelling required warmer apparel. This he would not hear of, as the night coach was on the point of starting. He, however, contrived to supply me from his own resources with a greatcoat, a sort of policeman's cape, and a rough travelling cap, which tied under the chin. In due time we arrived at Bristol, where I was kept for several days loitering about, till finally my guide decamped and I returned to London. An hour after arriving there, I gave information to Scotland Yard of what had happened, and afterwards booked myself by the night coach for Kendal. That is all I have to say."
This strange story did not produce the slightest effect upon the bench, and very little upon the auditory, and yet I felt satisfied it was strictly true. It was not half ingenious enough for a made-up story. Mr. Bagshaw, I should have stated, had been led out of the Justice Hall immediately after he had finished his deposition.
"Then, Mr. Bristow," said the magistrate's clerk, "assuming this curious narrative to be correct, you will be easily able to provide an alibi." "I have thought that over, Mr. Clerk," returned the prisoner mildly, "and I must confess, remembering how I was dressed and wrapped up, that I saw but few persons, and those casually and briefly, I have strong misgivings of my power to do so." "That is perhaps the less to be lamented," replied the counting clerk with a sneering tone, "inasmuch as the possession of those articles," pointing to the cross and the coin at the table, "would necessitate another equally probable, though quite different, story." "That is a circumstance," replied the prisoner in the same calm tone as before, "which I cannot in the slightest manner account for."
No more was said, and the order for his committal to the county jail at Appleby on the charge of wilful murder was given to the clerk. At this moment a hastily scrawled note from Barnes was placed in my hand. I had no sooner glanced over it than I applied to the magistrates for an adjournment till the morrow, on the ground that I could then produce an important witness, whose evidence at the trial it was necessary to assure. The application was, as a matter of course, complied with. The prisoner was remanded till the next day, and the court adjourned. As I accompanied Mr. Bristow to the vehicle in waiting to convey him to jail, I could not forbear whispering, "Be of good heart, so we shall unravel this mystery yet, depend upon it." He looked keenly at me, and then, without another reply than a warm pressure of the hand, jumped into the carriage. "Well, Barnes," I exclaimed as soon as we were in a room by ourselves and the door closed, "what is it that you have discovered?" "That the murderers of Sarah King are yonder in the Talbot where you left me."
Yes, so I gathered from your note. But what evidence have you to support this assertion? This. Trusting to my apparent drunken imbecility, they occasionally dropped words in my presence which convinced me not only that they were the guilty parties, but they had come down here to carry off the plate, somewhere concealed in the neighborhood, and this they mean to do tonight. Anything more? Yes. You know that I'm a ventriloquist in a small way, as well as a bit of a mimic. Well, I took the occasion when that youngest of the rascals, the one that sat beside Mr. Bristow and got out on top of the coach the second evening because, freezing cold as it was, he said the inside was too hot and close. Oh, I remember, though that I was not to recall it before, but go on. Well, Hugh and I were alone together in the parlour about 3 hours ago. I dead tipsy as ever, when he suddenly heard the voice of Sarah King at his elbow, exclaiming, "Who is that in the plate closet?" If you had seen the start of horror which he gave, the terror which shook his failing limbs as he glanced round the apartment, you would no longer have entertained a doubt in the matter. This is scarcely judicial proof, Barnes, but I dare say we shall be able to make something of it. You return immediately. About nightfall I will rejoin you in my former disguise. It was early in the evening when I entered the Talbot and seated myself in the parlour. Our 3 friends were present, and so was Barnes. "Is not that fellow sober yet?" I demanded of one of them. "No. He's been lying about drinking and snoring ever since. He went to bed, I hear, this afternoon, but he appears to be little the better for it." I had the opportunity soon afterwards of speaking to Barnes privately, and found that one of the fellows had brought a chaise cart and horse from Kendal, and that all 3 were to depart in about an hour, under pretence of reaching a town about 14 miles distant, where they intended to sleep. My plan was immediately taken. I returned to the parlour, and watching my opportunity, whispered in the ear of the young gentleman whose nerves had been so shaken by Barnes' ventriloquism, and who, by the way, was my old acquaintance. "Dick Staples, I want a word with you in the next room." I spoke in my natural voice and lifted for his especial study and edification the wig from my forehead. He was thunderstruck and his teeth chattered with terror. His 2 companions were absorbed over a low game of cards and did not observe us. "Come," I continued in the same whisper, "there is not a moment to lose. If you would save yourself, follow me." He did so, and I led him into the adjoining room, closed the door, and drawing a pistol from my coat pocket, said, "You perceive, Staples, that the game is up. You personated Mr. Bristow at his uncle's house at 5 Oaks, dressed in precisely similar suit of clothes to that which he wears. You murdered the servant." "No, not I," gasped the wretch. "Not I. I did not strike her." "At all events you were present, and that, as far as the gallows is concerned, is the same thing. You also picked that gentleman's pocket during our journey from London and placed one of the stolen Spanish pieces in his purse. You then went on the roof of the coach and by some ingenious means or other contrived to secrete that cross set with brilliants in his portmanteau." "What shall I do? What shall I do?" screamed the fellow, half dead with fear and slipping down on a chair. "What shall I do to save my life? My life?" "First get up and listen. If you're not the actual murderer—" I am not, upon my soul, I am not." "If you're not, you'll probably be admitted King's evidence, though mind, I make no promises. Now, what is the plan of operations for carrying off the booty?" "They are going in the chaise cart almost immediately to take it up. It's hidden in the copse yonder. I am to remain here in order to give an alarm should any suspicion be excited by showing 2 candles at our bedroom window, and if all keeps right, I am to join them at the crossroads in about a 1/4 mile from hence." "All right. Now return to the parlour. I will follow you, and remember, on the slightest hint of treachery, I will shoot you as I would a dog." About a 1/4 of an hour afterwards, his 2 confederates set off in the chaise cart. I, Barnes, and Staples cautiously followed, the latter handcuffed and superintended by the ostler of the inn, whom I had for the nonce pressed into the king's service. The night was pitch dark, fortunately, and the noise of the cart wheels effectively drowned the sound of our footsteps. At length the cart stopped, and the men got out, and were soon busily engaged in transferring the buried plate to the cart. We cautiously approached, and were soon within a yard or two of them, still unperceived. "Get into the cart," said one of them to the other, "and I'll hand things up to you." His companion obeyed. "Oh, look!" cried the fellow. "I thought I told you." "You're nabbed at last," I exclaimed, tripping him suddenly up. "Barnes, hold the horse's head. Now, sir, attempt to budge an inch out of that cart, and I'll send a bullet through your brains." The surprise was complete, and so terror-stricken were they that neither resistance nor escape was attempted. They were soon handcuffed and otherwise secured. The remainder of the plate was placed in the cart, and we made the best of our way to Kendal jail, where I had the honour of lodging them at about 9 o'clock in the evening. The news, late as it was, spread like wildfire, and innumerable were the congratulations which awaited me when I reached the inn where I lodged. But that which recompensed me 1,000-fold for what I had done was the fervent embrace with which the white-haired uncle, risen from his bed to assure himself of the truth of the news, locked me, as he called down blessings from heaven upon my head. There are blessed moments even in the life of a police officer. Mr. Bristow was, of course, liberated on the following morning. Staples was admitted king's evidence, and one of his accomplices, the actual murderer, was hanged, the other transported. A considerable portion of the property was also recovered. The gentleman who, to give time and opportunity for the perpetration of the burglary, suggested by the perusal of Mr. Bagshaw's letter, induced Mr. Bristow to accompany him to Bristol, was soon afterwards transported for another offence. The end.